I would like to welcome everyone to the City of Charlotte's City Council's Budget Straw Votes meeting. I want to say thank you for tuning in on your lunchtime and a little bit later this afternoon. So this meeting is being called to order. Today's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic meeting statutes, and the requirements of those statutes are being met through electronic means as well. I hope that you're watching us on the government channel, or the city's Facebook page, or the city's YouTube page, and that accessibility is really, really important and for us to be able to participate. We have several council members that are attending this meeting inside of the government center, as well as several on our virtual screen. And so I'm going to start with introductions of the council members that are here in the building, and then we will go to those that are attending virtually. So I'll start in the District 7.
Ed Driggs. Thank you, Mayor.
Julie Eisel, Mayor Pro Tem, serving at large.
I'm Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Tarp Kari, District 6.
All right. And now we'll go to those members in attendance virtually. Ms. Jackson? Can we get a speaker view, I guess?
It's
coming.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Good afternoon, Matt Newton, District 5.
Braxton, District at large.
Greg Phipps at large.
All right, I just want to check in to make sure. I understand Ms. Ajmira is going to be with us pretty soon. And Ms. Johnson?
We're still waiting.
Okay, we're still waiting on Ms. Johnson and Ms. Ajmira. So I'm going to go through the remaining parts. Hopefully those two council members will be able to join us. Now I'd like to have an introduction of the staff who are present in room 267, and we'll start with our city clerk, our acting city clerk.
Stephanie Bell, Deputy City Clerk.
Billy Ton, City Clerk's Office.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Kelly Flannery, CFO. Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget. Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
All right, thank you everyone for being here today. All right, this meeting is for the Charlotte City Council today for the purpose and intent of voting on the amendments or adjustments to the city manager's recommended 2022 budget that were proposed at the May 19th budget adjustment meeting by the mayor and council, and then directed to direct the manager to prepare the documents and resolutions for the 2022 budget ordinance. This is a very serious effort to make sure that the council is aware of what will be prepared and presented at a formal meeting of the council. And just a reminder for everyone, the adjustments from the May 19th meeting that received at least 5 votes were reviewed and analyzed by staff, and we got the information on these changes and the staff's comments yesterday. And we'll have the manager address the materials that were sent to us. Today, based on the information that's received, we will have further discussions of those proposed adjustments and vote to determine if any will be included as an actual adjustment to update the proposed 2022 budget ordinance, which is a pretty extensive document, that we will vote on at our June 14th business meeting. For the process, I propose that we go through each proposed adjustment one by one to discuss it and get any further clarifications needed. And then after those clarifications are presented, then we will take a vote on proceeding. And if you have 6 votes, then it moves forward as an update in the proposed budget document ordinance that comes from the manager. Before we get started on the proposed amendments, I'd like to turn it over to the manager to provide any additional information or comments that he might have.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'd first start by just saying the team appreciates the positive comments that were made last week as it relates to the budget and the budget process. What we've done is taken the questions that were proposed last week as well as the budget adjustments and provided you with additional information. After I turn it back over to you, Mayor, the Budget Director, Ryan Bergman, will go and do the process or the responses if there's any additional information that is needed. Basically, we've divided this into 3 areas. One being those 4 items that were, let's back up, 5 items that had dollars attached to them, and this is the memo that you received yesterday. 4 of those items, again, we've priced out, and also, as we mentioned last week, there was $150,000 in the undesignated balance, and with that, there's sufficient funds to cover those 4 items. We did have 1 item that was above that $150,000 threshold, if you will, of the undesignated balance, and that dealt with shift pay, shift differential. And in the memo, we talked a little bit about how we would compare to some of our peer jurisdictions when it comes up to this shift differential. Council Member Winston provided this particular adjustment. And one of the things that we pointed out is that basically the shift differential is typically provided as an incentive for employees to work the second and third shifts. When we look at our peer cities, typically that shift differential is somewhere between 65 cents and $1.60 per hour. So as we go through that particular item, I'd like to put on the table, just even from the beginning, this is something that we've looked at in the past, and I would be very much open to having this being researched, analyzed, and incorporated into next year's budget as an opportunity also. I'm not sure if that works with the council member who actually made the adjustment, but I just want to put out there before you get started, that we believe that a shift differential is something that should be a part of our compensation package. I will tell you, a weak WEEK overview is very difficult to come back with something to you that is substantial. I will make the other thing I would say, that I believe going into FY 2023 that I would recommend something north of that. But again, we would have to do the analysis. And then lastly, we have two items that, while they did not have a dollar attached to them, that's items 6 and 7. So we've set these out in 3 different pieces. And Mayor, with that said, I'll turn it back over to you.
Mr. Eggleston?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll come back to Mr. Winston. Mr. Eggleston?
I just wondered if for the manager, whoever, have we made the information that's in front of us available online for folks to reference as we go through it?
It will be immediately after the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Winston?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jones, for that explanation. And I do think it's a sufficient explanation. I would ask, are we able to include in this budget that language, that kind of forward-looking language, that a shift differential is something that we is something that we should research and potentially include in the next budget cycle? And if so, I would like to make a motion to include that language in the budget and remove that 25-cent per hour differential from consideration.
Yeah, Councilmember Winston, we are able to point to that and insert it into the compensation and benefit recommendations that are in the back of the budget book. So yes.
So moved. If that,
So I want to clarify, Mr. Winston said, and reference the 25 cents. I don't know that the compensation document ever references an amount that we.
Proposal, Mr. Winston's proposal.
I know that.
correct. No, I'm not asking. I would remove the referral number 5 from consideration and include the language that Mr. Jones said about researching for future budget.
So that would be an amendment to the compensation resolution that's included in the budget package.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so when we get, I just want to make sure, we said that we would do this in order, but if we'll make a comment there about the recommendation that is being changed with the agreement of the motion, the person that made the motion, as well as the manager. So that would be the compensation resolution would be amended for the study. Okay, so if you'll just make a note of that under number 5.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Driggs.
The document we have shows requests of $140,000 against a $150,000 available undesignated balance. So if we commit virtually all of the undesignated balance, are we going to limit ourselves? Are we going to not have flexibility to respond to situations? Or is it okay to adopt a budget that has no undesignated balance in it?
So what this pot really is an undesignated balance that we were bringing to City Council for budget adjustments. I think last year when we approved the budget, we only ended with about $1,000 in that. So to answer your question, yes, we do feel we have the flexibility to address needs as they arise, even if these funds are used.
I am going to do that. I'm going to suggest that, but we have to go through this for a little bit more. A few more people want to speak. So Ms. Ajmira has joined us, and she'd like to be recognized. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted a clarification on Mr. Winston's motion. Mr. Winston, is this part of the comprehensive case study, or is this just separate item that you'd like us to look at it separately as part of our next year's budget?
Mr. Winston, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. In conversations with the manager and from what Mr. Bergman referenced, it does seem like this will be appropriate for the comprehensive pay strategy. and looking at it in the context of next year's budget and moving forward.
All
Does that
right.
answer your question?
Ms.
Yes,
Ajmira?
yeah, so I support that. I think we do need to look at our comprehensive case study and make adjustments accordingly. So I'll be supporting Mr. Winston's motion.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Has Ms. Johnson joined us? She's on her way, so we'll continue on. So I just...
She's on now.
Okay, Ms. Johnson, I hope that what we're doing is we have three boxes of items to make an adjustment, and Mr. Winston has revised his adjustment on the shift pay differential to compensation resolution for shift differential study in the upcoming FY23 budget. And there's the words that are being recorded will be more accurate, but that's a quick summary of that just to catch everybody up. So we have now, I'm actually going to recognize people for questions on each general item. So the first item are items below the $150,000 available undesignated balance. And the adjustments there are listed in the document, and I will read them for the benefit of those that are watching us. The adjustment is for the Bengali Women's Forum for $10,000, Siloam School Restoration $10,000, Tree Charlotte $50,000, and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Historic Landmarks Commission Revolving Fund, $70,000. This would be an adjustment with those details for amendments for $140,000 to add to the budget.
Motion to adopt all four adjustments.
Second. Well, yes, we're going to have questions. I was just getting a motion and a second.
Second.
With the motion was made by Mr. Eggleston, second by Mayor Pro Tem, and now we're going to open the floor for questions or further discussion. Did Mr. Bergman had something, and then I'll come to Mr. Driggs.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that with each of these, we did make sure that they're eligible for funding. You have two financial partners in Bengali and Tree Charlotte who had submitted applications. We're good with those as far as from a process standpoint and a financial standpoint. Siloam School, we did partner with in FY2018, as Councilmember Phipps mentioned, and it's really for the same concept. And then the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Historic Landmarks Commission is we funded that last year as well. It's actually kind of an intergovernmental transaction since Mecklenburg County is the financial source there. From a process standpoint, we're comfortable with all four.
All right. Mr. Driggs?
Just a brief clarification. I thought we were increasing funding for the Historic Landmarks Commission from $35,000 to $70,000. Is that not the case?
Yes, sir.
That is the case.
All right. So why do we have $70,000 here? Use of available undesignated balance if we already had $35,000
It was
in the
one
budget.
time last year.
Yeah.
It was a one-time expenditure.
It was
in the
one
last-
time last
Yep.
year, so we need to allocate the full amount.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We now have at least 3 budget directors in the room to be able to respond to our questions. So with that, any further question or discussion? Hearing none, I will begin the roll call vote with Mr. Graham.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson? Mr. Newton?
I'm sorry, yes.
All right. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
All right, that passes unanimously. The second item is items above the $150,000 available for undesignated balance. There has been a motion to change that to include in the FY2022 compensation resolution the study of a shift differential for the City of Charlotte employees.
Second the motion.
I have a motion from Mr. Winston.
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Driggs on that modification. All right, any discussion or comment? Any questions? Hearing none, we'll go to our roll call vote. So Mr. Graham,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Newton, Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston? That
Yes.
passes unanimously. All right, the last item on our agenda are the items without a funding request because it's a question of how do we do this? And I'm going to call on the manager to address 6 and 7. And I think we have a correction again on how we look at the housing initiative. So, Mr. Jones?
So, Mayor, before I turn it over to the budget director, one thing that I wanted to do on the expansion of affordable housing initiatives, and I don't think I did a good enough job last time, but I wanted to try it again. So in the FY2022 proposed budget, there are dollars associated with affordable housing, which are typical all throughout the budget, for instance, PAYGO and what we have done in terms of innovative housing. But over and above that are $7 million that are related to the corridors for housing and $7 million that are related to the corridors for jobs and economic development. So I just want to focus a little bit, as well as in the calendar year 22 bond, there's another $10 million associated with the corridors of opportunity. But I want to just come back to the $7 million that's associated with housing related to the corridors of opportunity. Unlike the $10 million in the current budget that's related to the corridors of opportunity, which we split between ED and housing and placemaking, jumpstart grants, transit, we put in $14 million for, again, workforce development and jobs, and $7 million for housing. We have not allocated any of those dollars. So many of the ideas and concepts that came up last week are exceptional. They are, some of those ideas and concepts are in the packet that you received last night in terms of similar programs that we have. What we did is give you an overview of each one of those programs, and it's all across this continuum from homelessness to being able to have home ownership. And what I would ask as you have that deliberation is that to have the opportunity to work with the council, whether it's the Great Neighborhoods Committee or, just Team Charlotte, to see what is the best allocation of that $7 million for programs that work but may be over, that we run out of funds from year to year, or programs that we haven't thought about beforehand. So I guess what I'm saying is that what occurred last week is very good. It's those types of discussions. I just didn't want to have you leave with the concept that there isn't additional funds for housing programs. And one of the major things that will come out of that bucket is where we started off, I guess, 3 years ago with aging in place, which has now morphed into staying in place, which we're trying to develop programs that, on a pilot basis, that would allow individuals to stay in their homes. So we heard you during the budget development process, and that's why we set aside so much money in order to address some of these programs. So I just wanted to be able to say that. Did I get it, Ryan?
Right, and just to put a little bit of context behind that, we pay for a lot of our housing investments out of PAYGO, other than operating costs and other than the $50 million affordable housing bonds, of course. So last year in PAYGO, we had innovative housing dollars and we had money that was earmarked from the corridors bucket for housing, and that totaled $6.7 million. So this year in this budget, when you include the innovative housing bucket and the $7 million in corridors, you have $10.2 million. So you actually have a pretty sizable increase, which I think is what we were trying to explain last week, that there's some flexibility in those funds for some of these programs and concepts as they get developed over the next few months. But we did actually skip one here just for consistency. The next one was the road to hire concept that was voted on.
Can we finish this one first and come back to that? Because I think what Ms. Johnson's request was, if aside from the questions on specific programs, her request was, let's see if I can find it here, was to have impactful, I believe was one of the words that she used, intentionality for affordable housing. And I'd like to suggest to do that. My suggestion would be that we actually talk about the council vote on a motion to refer this item to the Great Neighborhoods Committee with an idea of how do we expedite and make intentional impact in our communities with this $10.2 million. Because what we really need to do is get that program underway. And I know that we're taking July off, but I'm sure that there are some folks that want to work double up on during June or July. And I know that Ms. Johnson is on this committee as well as the chair of the committee is here. And I think we need to take an affirmative approach to this and say that we are going to have a recommendation that is impactful and expedite affordable housing programs over the summer. How about that? Is that, Ms. Johnson, did you hear the proposal? The council would make that referral to the Great Neighborhoods Committee.
That sounds great, but I'm not on the committee.
She's not on the committee.
Oh, I thought you were on that committee. Maybe you attend that committee a lot, that I thought you were on the committee.
She's an honorary member, right?
Honorary member, Ms. Johnson. You've already got your new designation, so that's pretty cool. All right, so I'd like to have the motion.
Can I make a comment before we move on?
And can you make the motion too?
Yeah, I make the motion that we refer this to the Great Neighborhoods Committee for further consideration.
Second. All right. Now, Mr. Graham for comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Mr. Manager and Budget Director for this report. And I want to thank Councilmember Johnson as well as Councilmember Wallington for a number of the bringing some of these issues up to our attention. I think housing obviously is a very important topic for the leadership around this table, which is our mayor. I think it's very important for all the council members around the dais, and I think it's an important topic for our community. As we focus on the issues that we have today and the issues that we will inherit tomorrow or in June when we vote on the 2040 plan. And so the issues of stability of housing, displacement of housing, home ownership is really, really critical for our city. I think, well, I don't know, I had the opportunity throughout the month of April going into May to have conversation with the staff and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marsha Fudge, in reference to a program she was doing for me on another issue. But it kept me in constant contact with her office for about 2 to 3 weeks, talking to her staff specifically and her directly on a number of occasions. And it was never about the topic I wanted to talk about, which was Beds for Kids. It was about what the city of Charlotte was doing in reference to housing and how Charlotte was a national model for what we were doing along the housing scope. And how her staff and her organization, as they came on board, were looking at national models, and Charlotte always came to the top of mind in terms of what we were doing across the housing scope. Working with our staff over the last couple of years and talking with other colleagues in Dallas and Atlanta and DC about affordable housing, other council members asking what they were doing. One council member said, "Why are you calling me? Just call Pam," right? I believe we have one of the best housing directors in the country. And her staff does an amazing job. And as you look through all these programs that we have and that we're implementing, I think we have done a really, really, really good job on the housing front. Do we have a lot more work to do? definitely, right? And I want to wait till the manager come back because I want to challenge him. So I think you heard the challenge coming and left the room. But I just think it's really, you heard the challenge coming, you left the room.
To give Pam a high five in the back.
Yeah. We got one of the best housing directors in the country, and I'm in Atlanta a lot, and I talk to a lot of those folks. I talked to people in Charlotte, and I even told the mayor, someone was giving me a hard time about what the mayor of Atlanta was doing about raising $50 million for affordable housing. And I just listened and I listened. I said, well, she kind of stole that concept from our mayor, and our mayor actually doubled it by getting the private sector to do $50 million too. So I'm not sure why you're complaining, right? And so people just really don't know what we're doing, why, to the extent that we're doing, we're passing bonds. And Mr. Manager, I'm going to challenge you. There's no budget related to this, right? I'm going to challenge you. I think we have a car that can go 150 miles an hour that we're only driving 100 miles an hour, right? And I think over the next year on the housing front,
Change the gas.
No, we're just gonna step on the pedal, right, and blow the engine up, right. I think the mayor has talked a lot about developing on city-owned land, right. I think this is the cycle that we do it, right. I know Councilmember Winston and I and others have been talking about other type of developments, whether they're tiny homes or container homes. All require the usage of city-owned land in this development. I think it's the time for us really to exceed what we're already doing, and we're again 100 miles an hour is breaking all type of laws, right? We're breaking laws at
Second.
right, but I think a lot of us really want to put this thing to the floor and really begin to, and this is a message that came from our COVID-19 task force in terms of what can we do more? How should we be looking at our housing trust dollars? Can we use them differently? Why do we have all the city land just waiting for a right for development? When are we going to do it? If we didn't have the staff in place or the political will around the table to do it, I would back off. But I think we got everything in place, and so we just need you and your management team to push on that pedal and really over the next year and a half, starting when the budget is adopted in June. That affordable housing, that we got to make sure that not only people are talking about what we're doing, but I want people coming to Charlotte to see what we're doing, right? And I'm not trying to lose any staff in the process, right? Right.
Definitely, we can't do that.
Right, because we got
a top-notch group.
We got a hell of a drivers in that department, right? But I just think, just based on working with the group, working with you, understanding what the mayor wants to do. And I'm not speaking for her, but she said it a number of times. Now's the time for us to really, as we do this 2040 plan, as we think about displacement, all the things that Wallington and my vice chairman have said over the last year, I have said, I think we're now ready for action on those fronts.
As the Safe Communities Chair, I'd like to remind people that the City of Charlotte does not endorse driving above the posted speed limit.
All right, I have Mr. Phipps, followed by Mayor Pro Tem, and then Mr. Bakari. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, so this referral is immediate. Am I correct?
If you vote for it, it's immediate.
Okay.
I think you may be able to pass this one right away.
Yeah, I'll just save my ideas for a referral to the committee once it's approved. Okay. So it's not too prolonged the meeting. Thanks.
I think that this is my suggestion. The committee has had a housing framework that talks about what we're trying to do and accomplish. And I think almost any program can be reviewed under that framework as long as it contributes to the positive increase of work that we're doing in affordability for our housing program. So we'll get to that after the vote, Mr. Phipps. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I agree with everything that Chair has said, and I had some opportunity to talk to Ms. Weidman about the down payment financing and why perhaps people weren't accessing those funds, what's happened with the markets, market conditions and whatnot. And so I think there is some great ideas out there, and she certainly knows a lot more than, you know, when I proposed that, I didn't understand the full context of what was happening in the market. So I completely support the notion that we really kind of expedite this work. We have, and I absolutely support your comments about Ms. Weidman. We have an incredible asset. My only concern is that if she gets in the car and goes from 100 and 150, she pulls a Thelma and Louise and keeps going if she doesn't get the resources she needs. Because I think she's pretty busy and pretty overloaded right now with all of the great work. So hopefully, you know, the manager's office will be very conscious of what she needs to do that work.
All right, Mr. Jones wants to reply to his manager's office comment, and then we'll be followed by Mr. Bakari.
No, so I literally did go out and give Ms. Whiteman a high five. What I'd like to add to the conversation also is that this is the right time because we have this additional round of federal stimulus dollars. The city, the county, and the school system, we're working together. And I believe there's an opportunity for additional funds to go towards this, which is a very important endeavor for the city.
It would be great to have that kind of collaboration. Mr. Bakari.
Yeah, I think this is great. I agree with everything that was said except the analogies, of course. But I wholeheartedly support this as well. And I would also challenge us all as we think about what does the next phase look like? Because we've done some groundbreaking stuff over the last many years. Pam Weidman, I echo that, like the best, the absolute best to work with, knows her stuff front to back and is dedicated to it. I think our next chapter needs to not be, though, just upping dollars. I think there's a tendency for us to do that, to say, well, 50 was last time and 75 was the match, so in order to beat that, we have to beat it with dollars. Sure, let's beat it with dollars, but let's also innovate a little bit. I think we've tested and trialed a few things that now we have some data on. Ms. Weidman knows those data points well, and I think a lot of us work on things individually in this topic around the state, around the community, and I think it's time for us to kind of unite all those things under one banner where possible. And there's two things that I've been working on. One is with our General Assembly, finding opportunities to innovate with funding there in different ways. But the other one I'm most excited about is collaborating with the private sector folks here in the development community, but also with a bunch of partners in Wilmington, both the development community, private sector folks like Live Oak Bank and others, and then this nonprofit organization called Cape Fear Collective. And I introduced them to our Charlotte folks, to folks like Mark Etheridge, who have been doing innovations with NOAA. And it's that entire model of for low profit that I think could be where we really revolutionize this next step, because we can go out there, and if the private sector invests in this, treating it, you know, more like a bond than a stock, willing to get limited returns, we can unlock massive amounts of money that can enable us to truly make a huge dent in the affordable housing crisis as we know it. So my hope is that we look towards these groups. I'm talking to them right now about expanding it and creating a Carolina collective where we throw all these innovations, the things we read about in the Fast Company article, things like that, and then we just unify. So my hope is that that can be a challenge for us as well.
Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Pam Weidman for all the hard work she does. And as most of you know, that the affordable housing crisis was a primary reason that I ran. So it's an honor to be a part of a group that's really making an impact on the problem. So thank you for that referral, Mayor. And, you know, I'll support, you know, anything that's innovative. You talked about the shipping container. I know that's one of the things I spoke about last February, I think, or my first year. So we have to be creative. There's a crisis. Tent City was a demonstration of the problem, just a demonstration, but the problem is still there. So I look forward to supporting anything that we can do to really push on the pedal and to solve the problem. So thank you. And thank you, Chairman Graham, for all the hard work that you're doing with that committee.
All right, Ms. Johnson, thank you. I can't tell you how important this is to see the variety of efforts and the opportunities presented today. So with that, I'm going to do a roll call vote. And we'll start with Mr. Graham.
Absolutely.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Newton.
Yes.
Ms. Watlington.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira.
Yes.
Mr. Phipps.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
Mr. Bakari.
Yes.
Mr. Driggs.
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston.
Yes.
That passes unanimously. So now we have the next item, which is road to hire pathways. And the considered language doesn't fit in this small box here, but on page 5 of the handout, you can see the language there that was considered. So who do I recognize? Mr. Bergman?
Yep. So we did include Councilmember Bakari's language, with the exception that we did cut off one thing, and I want to make clear. He also mentioned that his organization would not apply for any potential RFP, so please consider that to be part of the motion. So this one's a little bit different than the other budget adjustments that I mentioned, so I just want to talk a little bit about how we got here and have a little bit more information from last week. Road to Hire is a 501c3 organization. So in September of last year, we did a modified financial partners application process as part of CARES Act, the Economic Development Department did. Road to Hire was chosen for their a $250,000 program that would work in a similar fashion, but certainly not identical. So when we were developing this year's budget, we essentially piggybacked off of that. There's some uniqueness to this one in that they were a partner prior that we used, and then additionally there is $900,000 of county funds and $1 million of private funds that would essentially work together. And then additionally, this would be a summer program, which could mean a delay in a process could jeopardize this summer. But then additionally, we had it the way we did, where it did not appear in the budget, but it did appear as a concept in the presentation with the idea that it would be a formal council action before it was officially approved. So that's just the background of where we got to we are now. We have, because it's services in the community with a nonprofit, we do have flexibility from a procurement standpoint.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, look, I said my piece about it last week. I will just reiterate to everyone, as you see kind of how it's laid out here, those bullet points that they put together really are the crux of the issue I have with this. The first one, citing that we gave them CARES Act money as part of that process last year, that isn't at all what I'm talking about. That was a group of people that came to apply for a grant for what they already basically do, and then we saw their minimum criteria was met for that grant and then awarded it to them. It was not diligence on a company. It was not an RFP process or anything like that. And I think that's the problem, right? Right now we're talking about doing something significant, and with a significant amount of money that's very important to the community. An RFP process is the minimum that we should be doing around that. It's county funds being cited, being provided. As I've come to understand it, the county basically said, oh, if the city's in, then we'll be in on that too. So it's not like someone else did diligence and we can trust that. It was simply them saying, okay, we can do it together. And them and their commitment to doing something together stands no matter what, and only sweetens the pot. So it's not like we lose that. They've already committed to wanting to partner. I think that's good. And then that third bullet, the application process could take from 4 weeks to 2 months and could prevent the program from this summer happening. To me, that's the travesty of what's going on right now. That's the cost. And it is terribly sad to me that we're in this position, but it's the cost of the process that has brought us to this point, unfortunately. And when you think about the fact that, again, almost $1 million and what that can do, also paired with the fact that right now we've got an economic development department putting together the most comprehensive strategic employment plan that has ever been built, of which this topic is a huge component. They have had zero opportunity to weigh in on this. This came from the manager's office. It never went through anyone in that department as they're building something out right now. And that's why I have such a big problem with this. How does it connect to our broader programs, our broader strategy? It's just a one-off thing that we're now just starting to get little pieces of more information. And again, I want to emphasize, this is in no way me trying to ding Road to Hire as an inferior program. It's a great program. It's an absolutely great program, but there's a lot of great programs in town, and we have an economic development department that is putting together a comprehensive plan to approach all of this that hasn't even been brought into this at all. And when you just glance at these numbers, so when you see the nearly $1 million, what's in between the lines here is that 37% of the money is for overhead. I mean, at a glance, as someone who runs programs like that, that is a large overhead amount for us to be putting in of city taxpayer general fund dollars. So I just think that the cost of how this came out of the city manager's department without inclusion and with kind of a disregard for the broader vision and what we're trying to do, that is the cost of potentially delaying what we could do this summer. But at the end of the day, if we can make that $1 million impact a $5 million outcome, impact 5 times the number of kids that need this help in different ways, it might take a different form, it might take the same form. We owe it to ourselves to be good stewards of these dollars in a topic that's so important. So when I hear we did diligence or the county's there or we could lose an opportunity this summer, those are all just excuses for why we got here in a flawed approach. So let's do it right. Let's do an RFP. Let's incorporate it into the strategic employment plan and figure out how we can get the biggest bang for our buck going forward. And let's not do this again.
Mr. Eggleston, followed by Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Eggleston, followed by Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Mr. McCarty saying let's not go about this the same way again. I would hope that the manager and staff would agree with that. I think there are valid points about how we could have done this better. I guess my question, and I agree with the idea that if we are working on a comprehensive workforce development strategy, then anything going forward should reflect that strategy that we want to invest in. I guess my question, maybe it's hypothetical, but I guess my question, or not one you can directly answer, but my question for Mr. McCarty would be, if we were to try to redo this a better way from where we stand right now, would we even potentially be able to put something forward this summer? So, I mean, I think I completely agree with you on everything going forward. I just wonder if the two options before us where we stand right now, not disagreeing with the flaws in how we got here, are do something this summer around workforce development or not do something this summer around workforce development. And if those are our two options, I'll choose the former, while also agreeing that it needs to be, we need a better process the next time something like this comes around. If I believed that an RFP could yield a program quickly that could be implemented and invested in this summer, I would be supportive of that, but I worry that it can't, particularly because there are dollars coming from other partners that are allowing this to move forward.
I mean,
All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
sorry, he was asking.
I was asking a
Oh, you
question
were
of him.
asking who would,
I mean, Mr. Bakari, if he believes that trying to launch an RFP at this point in the process would even potentially be able to yield something this summer, because I hate to lose the opportunity we have in front of us this summer. I agree with him about this needs to be handled better next time.
I think the question has to go to the manager because the RFP would have to come out of the management group. So I'm going to
We'll let Mr. Jones take a first crack at it. And if this, I mean,
So, mayors, members of council, I think the budget director laid out what the process was and what the thinking was around it. We had a vote. had a process very similar Monday night where you put out almost $1 million to partners that we had partnered with before. I will say two things. One is that this wasn't done in a vacuum. The ED director is a part of the manager's office and sit at the table as we discuss this. And secondly, if this is an issue for the council, pull it. Just don't do it. I don't think we need to have a big debate about this. We've laid out why we did it or why it was proposed. But if that's problematic, don't do it.
But the question I guess I posed directly was, if we said, because of how we got here, we're not going forward, we'd like to see an RFP, could that RFP potentially yield a similar program for us to support this summer?
I'll turn it over to Ryan, because I don't think this is what you would consider a typical RFP process that has been outlined. It's a process similar to what we do with financial partners, which would be 30 to 60 days. And if that's something that the council would want us to move forward with, I'm not going to say that that would destroy the program. If that is what gets the program going, I don't take issue with that.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem?
I really was just going to say what Mr. Eggleston said, that I totally support a different process in terms of how we do things. However, I don't want to lose the opportunity from an organization that we've just agreed is a good organization and successful. I don't want to lose that for this summer for students. We're getting to the end of the school year, and I would support a motion or a change to say, yes, going forward, augment the process with an RFP, but this year let's keep it in place and make sure these kids get the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
Mr. Driggs?
I think Mr. Bakari makes some very valid points, and I think we need to recognize the context here. We did not proceed with a $1.5 million investment in an excellent program and decided to put that out for an RFP instead. What is the status of that?
What program?
The program that was related to Mr. Bakari's nonprofit that we decided would not be, where we would not proceed because of allegations about an undisclosed conflict. What happened with that?
So
did we then go to the RFP, and have we seen an outcome?
So it's what the budget director said earlier. There was a process, not what I would call an RFP, but a competitive process, which a number of organizations received funding, including Road to Hire, for about $250,000.
So this is actually the same money, in effect, that was proposed for.
The last money that was.
So, okay, I mean, I'm kind of on the same page in terms of not wanting to compromise what is doubtless a good program. And I also want to be clear, I don't think this is a rebuke of the manager or of how we got to this place, but I think there are some very fair questions being raised here that we ought to consider about clarity on how we go about these things, where the RFP is indicated, whether we consider it a financial partner process, and consistency. So I would be in favor of proceeding with this, but I am in agreement with Mr. Bakari and troubled by some of the things that have happened in this space.
All right. Ms. Hajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, since we are talking about the process here with the RFP, I know we choose partners many times where we don't issue an RFP. In the case of ASC funding or arts and cultural funding, we have Foundation for the Carolinas, who is our partner in that process. So, Mr. Manager, did we ever issue RFP in that process?
We did not. We worked with the Foundation for the Carolinas previously to disperse over $40 million of CARES funds.
Right. So that tells me that it's really based on their proven record of being equitable in their distribution of dollars. So I'm trying to draw a comparison here. There are a lot of times where we have made an exception to not delay the program and the process and the progress that we want to see. So I hear Mr. Bukhari's point in terms of the process and being transparent with the RFP, but if you're going to look at that, then we have to look at every single partner that's out there, including Foundation for the Carolinas.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that there are times that we use an RFP and there's times we have a process. This isn't the same comparison. The foundation is not getting this money. They've been asked to administer, just like they did with our CARES Act money for the small business grants. That's a big difference. I would highlight a program that you brought up, Ms. Ajmira, the Bengali women. You know, we could have said they should go through an RFP because a lot of people are doing things around hate crimes, but sometimes we say, you know, these are partners that have applied for this funding, they are valid, they are doing good work, and like our financial partner program, they get the money if it's approved. So we can't mix up apples and oranges in terms of when an RFP is required for something like this, which I agree with, and when I think the thing is we do use both processes, and they're both valid processes. But sometimes if the council's will is to say do an RFP for a program like this, then we should consider that. It doesn't mean that the other process isn't valid.
So, Mr. Phipps is next. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Mayor.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ajmira. Is this in response or question, another question?
Yes, I wanted to follow up on Mayor Pro Tem's comment. So I think it's not clear when we use the RFP and when we don't use the RFP, when we make an exception. And I think that's where we need to have clear guidance, and we need to provide directions to staff as to when council would like to see the RFP and when they would not like to see RFP, where we just look at the track record. And I think that's a debate that I don't think we are going to solve today. But I don't want to jeopardize the program and so many summer participants who are going to benefit from this program. So I'd like us to move forward with this and then figure out later the process for RFP and process for non-RFP requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, if we don't allocate these funds from the city, will the program still be able to go on with the county funding? Their funding is not contingent on our funding. Is that correct?
So, Councilmember Phipps, my understanding of this, and Ryan, if I'm off, let me know, is that the city's funding is related to the summer program for the students, and that includes operational costs as well as a stipend for the students. The county money is associated more so with, I believe, classroom instruction that is not necessarily the summer programming or the stipends and the operational costs. Also, as I hope I mentioned earlier, if there's an application process that can be done in a month, I'm not sure if that would be a problem or not. I'm not going to say definitively that would stop the program. I just don't know.
Sounds like then our funding is really critical then to the success of the program for this summer. Thanks a lot.
All right, Mr. Bukhari?
Yeah, I'd just say on one earlier item, yes, we have financial partners and we do things, but I think there's a threshold item too. There's a big difference between $10,000 and almost $1 million. And that's what we're talking about here. I want to reemphasize something I said a minute ago, which is we have probably the most important work going on for the last 5 months or more out of the Economic Development Department staff on the strategic employment plan. This is as comprehensive of an approach towards the economics of this city or more than the 2040 comp plan. So this is something that there are entire segments of this work that focus on a cohesive, connected strategy around workforce, around pre-apprenticeship, around opportunities both in college and then going into the workforce. There are pieces that have been under design for a long time that are ready to roll that, again, attached to a broader theme, aren't a single financial partner to say, here's more money to keep doing the same thing that you're doing, only on a larger scale. So there may be touch points in that plan and in that approach where road to hire is the best option. My point is, and I've just confirmed with Tracy, there are things that could be ready to roll if we make that emphasis and we take it very seriously this summer, that this money could use. And this is part of our corridor money, and the corridors could be the beneficiary of those. I would hate to do one thing that isn't connected to our broader strategy when we have a strategic plan and an economic development department ready to go on all of this stuff, and that they can operate and operationalize something as soon as this summer already. So I just think my motion simply asks to hand the keys of this over to the group that's doing the substantial work so that they can figure out how it connects into the broader strategy, an opportunity they have yet to have. I think that's reasonable.
Can I ask a quick question of Mr. Bakari or Mr. Ryan, Mr. Bergen?
Sure.
I hear the budget department saying that they can't do it, but Mr. Bakari saying the ED department saying they could. If it's housed in ED and ED feels they could do it, why not do that? I mean, can we have ED? Can we have Ms. Dodson say whether or not she feels like she could get this out the door?
That's a slippery slope, Ms. Seisel, and I'm going to say that because, we don't hire the ED director, and you're asking her opinion when she's reporting to the city manager.
We have
Ms.
Weidman's opinion on.
No, you ask her opinion about things, but you're saying, let me make a decision. This policy decision is around what I heard two people saying. And I just, if you want to go in this direction, I understand we all have really strong relationships, but I think the question would best be addressed to the manager because he is the person that we would hold responsible for whether or not it happened. We couldn't go to Ms. Dodson and say, she says, yes, I can do it, or no, I can't. We can't hold her accountable for that. It's the manager's accountability that's on the line. So it's not that I don't trust staff to be able to give us opinions, but who are you going to hold accountable to deliver on those?
So I'll ask the manager, can we get dollars out the door this summer if we go through this new process that is proposed by Mr. Bakari for the budget?
Okay, so I'll try to be as balanced as I can with this. Okay, so you talked Monday night about the jobs plan, or didn't talk about it. In my understanding from Monday night's comments that we were 60 days away from discussions about it. So have we been talking about the jobs plan? Absolutely. Have we been discussing how we could use stimulus funds? Absolutely. Both along economic development, housing, even the digital divide. So there are programs that we have discussed, but not at the level that we're saying, let's roll these out, much like housing when we talked about earlier. There are a bunch of programs, and when we start to look at the programs, what's working, what's oversubscribed, what can we better fund. But if you ask me, do I have a series of programs to roll out to you today, I do not.
Okay. I've heard a lot of this conversation, and my view is that I've heard people say that we'd like to have a better definition of when do we do things because it's an informal agreement or a more formal RFP process. I think that's clearly something that can be discussed because there are many programs that we do as they come about. opportunities with the Y last year to make sure that every kid was fed. We didn't go out and do an RFP. They came to us and said, here's a partnership that we'd like. If you give us the money to do the food and these things, we're going to get these things done. And I think if the council wants to go through and make decisions about which one is an RFP or not, that really is incumbent upon us to ask the manager to give us a criteria and a policy by which to do it. In the absence of that policy, I think it's a question of how do we do things, and I'm very much aware that there are lots of programs out here, but no one has said that this program isn't an exceptional program, and no one has said that we can't do more of these programs. In fact, we ought to be doing more. So I just would say there's some work that if the council makes a decision that we want to have criteria by which the manager follows state law, that, you know, like all of our architectural contracts are required by law to go through an RFP process. But we don't have to take the person that has the best plan or the best lowest bid. There are lots of requirements that we can decide upon. And if that's a policy that the council wants, we can adopt that. I think it's very much one of these situations where the summer is here. We've got clearly the county saying this is something that we will be willing to work with, and the collaboration that we have to have with the county on many other initiatives. And I'm going to say this. Yesterday, was it yesterday, Mr. Eggleston, that we went and talked about the Alternative to Violence program? We had a contract with a Beatties Ford Road Training Center to do the same, very same work. We didn't delay that. We didn't go through an RFP process because it is an initiative of this council to make sure that our summer is safe. Our summer is safer if kids have a place to go. Now, we may not have done this the way that everybody wants to do it, but that's a change that we want to see. And for the work on the ED planning, workforce plan, I think that is an essential plan. But I think that we built affordable housing before we had a housing framework too. Now it's better as a result of that framework, but it didn't mean that we stopped doing what we were doing. And a lot of these things are like under $100,000 or whatever. And my understanding, and I keep hearing, how much is the actual amount for the summer this summer, Mr. Bergman, for Road to Hire?
It's a little under 900,000 for us.
So about that. And so if we are really thinking about this in a different way, I would say that's fair. But to me, a safe summer, kids going out and having the opportunity to participate in a program, and the lack of clarity around what the council's policy is on this is on us to resolve, not to necessarily take away that right and opportunity for kids. So I think everybody has spoken that Mr. Winston would like to speak, and then I'll go ahead and do the roll call vote. Mr. Winston?
Yeah, just, I guess what I had, thank you, Mayor, for your comments, because you kind of raised it up a level to the entire kind of, I think, procurement policy or procurement policies conversation. I guess my question would be to the council, I guess to Mr. Bakari, what if we did put in some type of note, I guess, sort of like we did on a previous item, or even a referral to committee, like as we did in a previous item, that the council take a comprehensive look or change of approaches to our procurement practices and policies. I hear what you're saying. I hear what Mr. Bakari is saying. As we implement widespread programs like this strategic jobs program, maybe there are things that we need to consider differently around procurement. I know there have been other council members that have had other procurement priorities, like figuring out how do we hire or do business with local businesses and local hires and whatnot. I know there are many limitations, but perhaps this is a deeper dive policy conversation that we can have kind of spurred out of this. Of course, this is not the first time in the past 12 months that we've had this kind of critical conversation, and there just seems like to be so many different procurement processes, as well as kind of exceptions to rules or different interpretations of law, that maybe that it again, just a more appropriate, larger conversation that gets spurred to action.
Mr. Winston, I'm going to say that I think what you said is very informative around trying to frame what is the question. And instead of the budget votes are supposed to be a number goes up or a number goes down. And so I'd like to resolve that issue. I think that when we are talking about the next steps, maybe what we really could do to implement this is to actually get some information about what we currently do and where it is, and then decide what is the question we're really trying to answer. I think we can review procurement, and there's a lot of procurement law and statutes and practices, and I don't know if that's necessarily as broad as we need to go, because there's the council's authority around some of these and discretionary funds versus what's required from the state, and I'm no lawyer and I'm trying not to be because there are too many good ones in this room already. I would say that let's do the budget thing, and then can we just think about this and talk about it when we have our next strategy session, or at some point when we're really looking at where do you want to spend your time next year? Okay, that kind of is what I'm thinking. Because we're trying to take a break, not add one more thing to the list so that before we disintegrate. Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call vote on what we are voting on is to augment the precision in the budget. Is that the correct motion? That's as stated provisions here to provide $890K to expand the road, and then go back and do a due diligence, RFP and due diligence process by the ED department, which again is problematic for us, to help underrepresented students. And so we're voting on the adjustment as stated in the materials provided to us. All right, is everybody clear on what the vote is? Okay. We're going to have a roll call vote. Mr. Graham?
No.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
No.
Ms. Watlington? Mayor Pro Tem?
No.
Ms. Ajmira?
No.
Mr. Phipps?
No.
Mr. Winston?
No.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes?
Mr. Eggleston? All right, so that passes with no change to the current budget process. But more work to come. All right? Okay, that is the end of our agenda today. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have one more item? Yes, you're right, we have that motion. I got it. Let me I was just hopeful to. All right. I'm just looking at here.
Mayor, I move to direct the city manager to prepare the necessary documents and resolutions for the fiscal year 2022 budget ordinance.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the resolution to have the amendments and the documents for the 2022 budget ordinance. This is a motion to move the document forward. There will be a vote of whether or not you approve of the document at our next meeting. But my assumption is that this is kind of like the straw vote for that, in a way. So I think that we'll go ahead. Is there any discussion on this? Mr. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question for the city manager, and it was in relationship to our arts funding conversation. I know we're talking about, so there's been this conversation about the funding in and of itself, but then there's also been, I guess, a grander conversation, a larger conversation about the 3-year plan. And I wanted to ask, do we have a roadmap for that? And is that something that is going to come in front of this council for further consideration? I think, I don't recall if we've actually approved the plan itself, or if there are, frankly, specifics in the plan as is. And I just wanted a little bit more of an update on all of that. what the future holds for that plan, if it will come in front of us again, and what those, if those specifics or the terms of that plan have been specifically defined.
Mr. Newton, I don't know that that's in direct relationship to the preparation of the documents for the budget ordinance. So can we do this vote and then come back to your question for the manager? Would that be?
Sure.
We've got a motion on the floor. So I'd like to go ahead and address those things, address the motion first.
Sure, I didn't quite know when to raise that question, so I just didn't want to lose the opportunity.
Well, I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
the question is to the manager about the process, but I don't know that that's a council item for us to discuss. It might be a discussion between you and the manager. So
Well,
let's go to the motion. I'm sorry, Mr. Newton?
Yeah, so it is something that I would like to ask publicly, because I do have the impression after conversations we've had this week, and certainly the one, but that yourself.
Mr. Newton, you're out of order. You're out of order, sir. We need to conduct this vote.
So I understand
Well, my question
he was addressing my question to him, Mr. Driggs, and so we will have this conversation after the vote on the motion that's on the floor, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the motion on the floor is consideration of a motion directing the manager to prepare the necessary documents and resolutions for the FY2022 budget ordinance. Mr. Graham? Yes. Ms. Johnson?
Mayor, I had my hand up for a question.
About the motion?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
And you tell me, if the motion is to move the budget forward, if we have a question regarding the amount of the ASC, I feel that this would be the appropriate time to ask the question before we move the budget forward.
I'm not sure that I understand. Are you asking to change the amount? Is it increasing or decreasing the amount in the budget to the arts funding? More than the how much is in it? 4 point?
No, it's regarding the structure of the funding.
Okay, see, this is about preparing the budget document, so it's about getting all the numbers right. I don't think that the structure of it does not require discussion under this motion.
Okay, then yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes?
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Jones and Mr. Bergman, you have your authorization for our June meeting. When do we vote on this? 14th. June 14th meeting, so thank you very much. Now, I think that it's not on our agenda for the budget session, but Mr. Newton has a question. I know that several council members have obligations beyond this, so
I guess it's just so interconnected or interrelated with the budget conversation that we're having. I do think it's slightly grander in scope, because we have, I think, made decisions as a council pertaining to arts and science funding. Having said that, I still think there's a lot of ambiguity, obscurity that surrounds this 3-year plan that we've talked so much about. And I just want to know when we will receive specifics on that, and what the process on that is going to be moving forward, particularly if there's a timeline. Not just for myself, but I think we've all had conversations with our arts community, and it's really to set expectations for them and make sure that our artists, particularly our individual creatives and small art groups, continue to be a part of this process moving forward.
all right, thank you. Mr. Jones, you have heard the question of what is the next steps after we adopt the budget on arts and science and arts and culture, sorry.
So thank you, Mayor. And Councilmember Newton, I will try to recap the presentation I made last Wednesday about the funding for arts and culture and the timeline. So I guess the key to maybe go to the middle of that presentation. The key begins after the council approves the straw vote, which was today. What we have is an allocation of funds for not only the ASC, which I believe it's 1.3 million would go to the ASC, $800,000 for their operations, and $500,000 for those two creative groups that were outlined in the presentation, as well as the $6.1 million to the 38 organizations that typically have received the funds, and we made that adjustment of $150,000 for the Harvey Gantt Center. So that was the numbers, and once that is all allocated, the funds again go to the Foundation for the Carolinas to distribute checks, okay? And then there's about $4.5 million left over from that allocation. So that's the beginning of year one, July 1st, and let's say all of that occurs July 1st. Between now and July 1st, there's, with this approval or this nod that we received today, we would hire a arts and culture, or let's just say officer. There is a group, an advisory group, that would be populated by the council and the private sector. And we would also have a arts and culture plan that the community works on over the course of the next year. So I think I hit the high points on that. Conceptually, in year two, in year three, there are no allocation of funds, because we're waiting to get the arts and culture official on board, get the advisory group assembled, as well as have this arts and culture plan. And once again, there are opportunities for board members of the ASC to be appointed on, that group. There are opportunities for the ASC to absolutely positively be at the table as we go through what the arts and culture plan will be like, which will describe what will happen in our community for the next decade. So if the question is what happens in year two, in year three, we're getting out in front of a community-led arts and culture plan, which should inform our community what allocation should look like in year two and year three. Does that help?
So I guess the real focal point of my question is surrounding the concept of future meetings moving forward for community and artistic input. It sounds like what you're saying is that first things first, we'll have to get this official onboarded before a timeline can be created. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Manager?
Well, I'm trying to give a bit of a timeline by saying that over the course of the next weeks, we should get the arts and culture official on board, establish this advisory group, start to solicit for a firm to do the arts and culture plan, as well as get community input about, what that plan should cover and things of that nature. You do the plan over the course of the next year, and then that plan informs what the next decade is like. So there's a timeline of getting things together, as I think you alluded to, but then the timeline is more or less dictated by that arts and culture plan and what comes out of it.
It sounds a bit loosey-goosey here in the short term. Having said that, it sounds like there will be a much more definitive timeline here soon, right, in the next few weeks. And so I just want to make sure that in this plan, which I think we're still trying to hammer out the specifics of, so I guess, the question for me is, would that be something that would come back in front of the council? But so maybe that's question one. But question two, I just want to make sure that whatever is decided in that time frame moving forward, where we have these meetings, that be clearly communicated to our arts community, more specifically our individual creative artists and the small group artists. Oftentimes, I think the conduit there is the ASC, so the ASC as well, so that they can be included in that conversation and not feel like, they don't know what's going on.
That sounds great, yes.
All right, I want to recognize Mr. Winston. Oh, I'm sorry, you're, Mr.
So my first question was, is this something that will come back in front of the council at a later date?
I need to check on this because I think that the ad hoc committee gave a presentation to the council, and I'm asking if the council voted on it then. Does anybody recall, or
The ad hoc
the
committee
council as a whole has already voted on this process?
on the manager's
on
proposal.
the manager's proposal, Mr. Newton, and approved
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you for that information. And yes, let's please keep our full artistic community involved and make sure that they're a part of this process and can contribute input here in the immediate future after this short-term period of kind of decision-making is completed.
Yes, thank you. I think all of us are really well aware of this is change that's coming and change that is going to be needed to continuous communication and some very hard work to be done. So thank you very much. Mr. Winston.
I just wanted to just follow up on Mr. Jones, who explained it quite clearly, that those slides of that presentation and that explanation was mailed to the arts group that we've been meeting with. So they have all of that kind of general timeline. And just to the last point that was made, unless the mayor feels otherwise, I do believe the ad hoc committee is still technically convened. So it might be a good idea once some steps are taken, maybe, we can kind of talk about it before a strategy session from a committee standpoint to get a kind of understanding and then bring, to have a deeper conversation as we move through the steps as a whole council.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I agree with Mr. Newton and Madam Mayor around having continuous communication on the funding and the plan that is sustainable moving forward when it comes to arts and cultural funding. But on a separate note, also to follow up on our discussion earlier